Who likes the idea of that? Good. Hopefully there's some live streamers out there that like the idea of participating in the project. Great. We have our panelists who are milling around in anticipation of coming up here. So now we have a session which is just really a Q&A type of session. If any of you have any questions, especially for the likes of David Graham and especially for the likes of our masterclass tutors, so if you can come up and join me on stage. So first up, no surprises, David Graham is here, so he'll be taking a masterclass at 12:30 on from enterprise to ecosystem. David Goad, who's here as well, will be taking a class on demystifying AI.
Artificial intelligence.
Yep. And Rosamund Christie, who's joining us from AGSM and UNSW, will be doing a session on adaptive leadership and making cultural change in organisations. And Mr. Max is our learning director. So maybe, Rosamund, just to, what have you seen this morning that kind of stood out as being important in terms of digital transformation and the cultural dimension you need to bring to bear? Any things?
Yeah, in particular, when David was talking about the fact that last year children have been the least creative, or sorry, it might have been you, Sam, that children have been the least creative, so that immediately brings up for parents an anxiety. When we translate that into organisations, what we actually see happening is a resistance, and not the glib, we talk about the resistance to change, but in fact, when we look at that through the lens of adaptive leadership, we're talking about resistance to loss. And so in organisations, we get a push-pull because when there is change, there's going to be loss. And leadership is required in that domain to work with the loss and to work across those people who are protecting what they may be losing, as well as working with competing value systems. So in an organisation where you have a push for transformation and change, and particularly in a legacy organisation, you'll have people whose role it is to mitigate risk. And those two competing value systems are what can absolutely stymie the possibility for the kind of movement that we're talking about and the speed of that movement.
Okay. And David Goad, I guess we've got two DGs here.
On the other day, yes. The other DG. Good name though, by the way.
What have you found from, like applying a technical lens, what are some of the challenges around culture in the adoption of artificial intelligence? What are some of the gotchas that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, particularly around culture. I've been involved in, 12 or 13 different AI deployments now. And getting people past the initial concerns, a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that they have around artificial intelligence. There's a lot of fear out there around things like ethics, bias, how do we use these tools. Getting them past that can be a bit of a challenge. But all the issues that people will talk about from an AI perspective in terms of ethics, bias, all these different things, they are fixable, they are addressable, right? So I think if people have an eyes wide open approach in terms of the technology and how they use it, and they understand the different things that they need to work through, then they can have a very, very successful deployment of that solution. So,
okay. And feels like we've heard a lot from you already. But I guess how David, have you what? From a cultural standpoint, has been one of the biggest levers that Lego's deployed in terms of making their transition from bricks to clicks.
Yeah, I think part of it is also realizing that we're still immature in going on this journey, and in a sense still being teenagers. I think in digital transformation, and I think in general you're seeing this in the way that we have digital obesity and other things. We're seeing the side effects of it. But realizing that also, gives you the patience to say, okay, we're still on a journey towards this, and everything is not perfect. And that can sometimes de-risk and take some of the fear away of saying, okay, we're seeing some things that, not all the things we like actually, but it's part of the journey, it's part of experimenting and also hitting some wrong directions, but then being able to pull in the right about it.
Yeah, one of the things I picked up from the session this morning that you gave, David, was there's a natural tension between trying to transform and also knowing what you stand for as an organization. So in Lego in particular, keeping to your DNA was one of the elements that you had to do. So there's a natural tension that's involved that you spoke about, where you're trying to transform, but you also need to know what you stand for as an organization and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And so you need to figure out that. So those natural tensions are the things that where culture comes into play, because you're trying to get people to get organized around a change. Yet, what are the things that are special about your organization, and especially if you're a legacy system, a legacy organization, that you need to keep? And that's one of the challenges for digital transformation.
And actually building on that, so one of the things we did concretely was we called ourselves Lego fundamentalists. So our small group was some of those that, we made it our mission to know the most about the legacy and understanding the past and what it was built upon, understanding the crisis and why that arose, so that we could disarm these things and build it on the right foundation.
Okay. Are there any questions from the audience? Is anyone here interested in asking a question of the panel? Don't be shy.
Question over there.
So I guess we probably need to repeat the question for the sake of the live streamers. So if I understood that correctly, so it is about building the culture in an environment like Lego.
Yeah, and whether it's necessary to build these small teams, innovation teams. Yeah, I think, and I can speak for the experience I have only, but the way to start such a journey, it's difficult to do as a big enterprise project. I mean, at least that's a massive investment, and so it depends on the maturity of the organization and whether or not executives are completely aligned and understand this. We did it more bottom up in the sense that it was about starting these small groups across the value chain to understand how do we innovate more effectively and experiment with these new things within each of the main steps of the value chain. Over time, that is lifting the entire organization up into being more agile, into experimenting more with these things and making the total journey.
Can I add something to that? We worked with an organisation that set up, this is a research organisation in Australia, preeminent organisation that set up a separate data lab to build its digital capability. And that lab had been going for a couple of years and felt it wasn't getting any traction with the organisation itself. And what we began to uncover when we started to work with them and look at why the organisation wasn't adapting was that there were two mutually exclusive groups and that there was resentment. So we're coming right back to that human kind of piece. And the resentment was from the legacy group that this rather cool, much more flexible work environment, great facilities, negotiable salaries, were seen to have advantages which kept the legacy group resentful. And so it began to be that the legacy group were called the Cardigan Brigade, and the digital group were kind of working on their own. And eventually, the younger kind of really dynamic people in that part of the business started to leave. So then you see if that cultural piece isn't worked on and the losses and the resentments exposed and worked with by the leadership, then you run into kind of that really intractable space where a huge amount of investment's been made, both human and financial, and the results aren't being produced.
If I can add, one of my experiences having deployed a lot of these different technologies in a lot of organizations is oftentimes people don't know what it is. Like you guys have probably sat here through all today, listening all about artificial intelligence, but you're still asking yourself a question, what is artificial intelligence, right? Same thing applies to things like blockchain, 3D printing. A lot of people really don't understand these technologies. So in my view, one of the best ways to get the change management going is to get the organization exposed to them, try some pilots, getting out in the organization, get people to touch it, use it, and then through doing that, they understand it better, and then they can figure out how to adopt the organization to it. So that to me is the best way of going about it.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting aspect here about bridging the generations as well. So this idea of digital natives, and so I guess we are all tribal at one level, and it's very easy to create factions around different centers of gravity, if you like, and building the bridges and finding ways to build those bridges. So whether it be better understanding of the underlying principles in the technology, or building bridges or connection with the different groups. And as David will most likely be talking about, writing love letters in your ecosystem masterclass.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and actually one of the things we did, because we encountered exactly this, them and us, and in the beginning we had this faulty idea that we should be this cool secret lab, and what symbolizes this was that you needed a special security card to get in.
Yep.
That completely backfired, everybody started hating us. So instead we flipped it around and said, let's be the most open lab in the whole department. And now every 2 weeks there are demo days where we basically invite broadly across the whole organization people in to come and tinkering with the stuff that's being created. And in that sense, we're starting that transfer of the rest of the organization, getting exposed to these new things, starting to pick up some ideas from it, and all of a sudden they're stealing with pride from what you're doing, and that's spreading across the organization. Yeah.
And I wanted to add something specifically for your question, which is, do you have to create a separate organization? Not always. There's no one size fits all. But in the session that I do, I give you an example of a bank that sees itself as a 22,000 person startup. And they're trying to do it, they did it right across the whole of their organization all at once. And so there are different approaches to it. Everybody starts with a different purpose in mind. And so you kind of need to work out what's going to be right for your organization, and there are different techniques. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd just highlight that in your wrap-up session, there's some good material on that as well. One of the things that is really important in all of these scenarios is how people are incented to behave. Sometimes we apply these things and forget about the fact that we're actually, the people that we're trying to get to innovate are only focused on how they can meet quarterly KPIs or an annual budget, when a lot of what we're talking about from a digital transformation standpoint is something that's taking place over a 3 to 5 year time horizon. So that's one of the things I've noticed, is that aligning incentives to the behaviors that you want to instill in an organization. Are there any other questions out there? Yes, Drew? You have a question? No. You're just waving.
Seems like sort of with digital transformation, you need a strong existing culture to platform from. Is there any cases in which digital transformation kind of united organization and created a culture as an exhaust, or do you require sort of a strong brand, strong sort of foundation first?
So, sorry, if you could just repeat the question then.
Yes, so I'm understanding, from the question I think I understand, do you need the culture in place in the first instance, or can you create it as you're going? Is that basically what the question's asking? It's almost impossible to have the culture in place unless it's a startup. So that idea of what you're trying to build within it means that you have to constantly be working with the people that you have. And I think the really key thing that's been said in the last few minutes is, if we overcome people's fear of what they don't know by letting them touch and play and do and be educated in that, then that's a huge step towards a cultural transformation. Because people fear most what they don't know, and there's an awful lot of ego that kind of runs on that in organisations.
It's funny, people tend to have very diametrically opposed views, either very, very positive or they're very, very freaked out. And the reality is the truth is in the middle,
Yeah.
right? And just getting them educated on what the truth is helps a lot, I think.
And getting people to understand that it's and not but. It's not this and therefore not that, it's both, and how can we work with that?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because your question was, do you need a really strong culture already, or can you build that? Successful organizations already have strong cultures, right? And so it's not about building a whole new culture, it's about adapting your culture and creating an environment where people can operate slightly differently to how you might have operated in traditional organizations. In one of the classes that I do, I talk about the difference between a digital culture and a traditional culture, and not that one's bad and one's good in relation to digital transformation. You just need to adapt your culture in a way that's going to enable your organization to operate differently. And so I think it's more about, it's not about strong cultures, it's about creating an evolution of your culture wherever you're at to enable transformation, to be digital. Yeah.
So I've got one last question for the group. This idea of hyper-personalized experiences, what are some of the implications, not just from a technology perspective or a cultural perspective, but on a societal level that you see around this idea of creating increasingly personalized experiences? I guess at one level we all kind of crave this sense of being understood and listened to and heard, but then there are some dark sides to that.
Yeah, I might, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, you're talking about recommendation engines. So we've all been exposed to this with Spotify, Netflix, right? Making recommendations in terms of what's your preferred movie, what's your preferred song, whatever. There's a positive and negative with all things technology, right? The positive is it's only tool sets like AI, machine learning is going to be able to give you that really, really hyper-personalized view, simply because those are the only tool sets that can collect all this information about you as an individual to figure out a really good recommendation about what you're going to like, right? So that's a good news story that we have the tool sets to do that. The problem is if you give something that's very customized to that person, they start to lose variety. So if you keep getting the same music played to you because you like that music and you're not being exposed to other things, right? Then all of a sudden we start to lose that variety and we start to lose our experiences. And so there's this counter argument around artificial intelligence and ethics about this issue of, are we going to start losing our ability to make decisions because we started to get hand-fed by these tool sets? And it is a truth of it, right? They talk about, I think the statistic quoted earlier about people losing creativity in the digital age. That's the side effect of this issue, right? So there are both positive and negatives to the technologies in that sense.
And that's even more clear in the political domain, when we can then influence what people actually read. You know, if you're only being fed what you want to hear, then you are never going to be able to step out. And that's probably one of the greatest dangers for us politically at the moment, is that we have an ever more polarising environment, and the polarising is coming because we're just getting constantly fed what we want to hear.
True, very true. Yeah, and I think from the perspective that I have and Lego is looking at education and child learning, and their the ability to personalize, individualize learning based on learning styles, so that the system is able to constantly adapt the level of difficulty and the type of content to the interaction with a child that actually will accelerate the learning process is something that's really interesting.
So kind of lastly around that, ethical considerations. Like what we found in some of the conversation that came up in Sydney when we were doing this on Tuesday, and also in Melbourne, is the ethical dimension to all of this. Any particular points of view?
Yeah, because I was doing this, he was referring to my session on Sydney on Tuesday, where I was talking about artificial intelligence, and the whole issue of ethics came up, and there was quite an interesting debate around the positive and negative aspects of it, right? It is a complex issue. It's not something I could cover in like 30 seconds here on stage. But a plug for my session this morning, right? It is something that people have to work through. It's not something that can't be overcome. Again, you just have to have this eyes wide open view about it, and making sure you're ticking off all the different things you need to think about as you're deploying these technologies.
And I just add to it that adaptive leadership is always about looking at complex issues for which we don't have answers. and certainly not easy answers and straightforward answers. And those usually reside with the human element, behaviour, attitudes, beliefs, values, that we have to engage with. And as humans want to, I think.
Well, no technology is inherently bad. It's how people use it. Exactly. Right? Which is what you're getting to. So it's always the people aspect of things.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating that many of the issues that come up are actually, we use the lens of the technology. So, we talk about digital diet, and, gossip is something that isn't digital. Gossip is something that's societal, and what it means and the implications of it. So many of the themes that we talk about in digital transformation are just different forms of leadership and cultural and understanding of human processes, essentially human interaction. Okay. With that then, I think we'll draw the panel to a close. So I'll talk in a moment about the different masterclasses, but thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess it's worthwhile also talking about the fact that the masterclass tutors are here in the break. So if you want to carry on the conversation, you've had your interest sparked, they're actually available to talk to you on the day here, but they also will be on the social learning platform at various times. So you'll be able to submit any questions or queries that you have around the session now or any of the masterclasses in an interactive social learning platform. So I just want to touch on this for a moment, that if you're inclined to sign up for the masterclasses today, you can join us. There are 2 that will be delivered in person, because we'll be running 2 streams simultaneously, and unlike digital humans, you can't be in 2 places at once. And then the balance of those sessions will also be available on the social learning platform. So those of you that don't have time to do that today, feel free to sign up to the social learning platform, and you can actually take each one of these masterclasses online. And as I mentioned before, we'll be coming back together in October in Sydney and also in Auckland on the 12th of November, where we will actually be carrying this journey forward. So the idea here is that this is not just something that you can interact with once and get a few good ideas. This is a way to support you on your digital leadership journey and your digital transformation journey. So if you're interested in signing up to the social learning platform, the AGSM pod showcase is out there. So just a small plug for some of the organisations that are here. So Certus Digital, Cognition, they each have pods, and there will be, for the live streamers, interviews with each one of these organisations, so you can get a taste for the technology and the platforms and the methods that they have to offer online or at a distance. So we have Unique, we have Emmett, we have AGSM out there. So if you're interested in any of their learning experiences that you can carry forward with AGSM and some of their leadership programs, they can talk to you about those. But most importantly, make sure you go and visit Emmett and get your personalised emoji, so you never have to send a generic emoji again. So I think the phrase from Kira was, friends don't let friends send generic emojis. So with that all done, we're going to go to a break now, so please enjoy morning tea. Thank you so much.